Direwolves are back, or are they?
Hey Hank, Dr. Beth Shapiro here, Colossal's Chief Science Officer. Just wanted to say thank you for covering our direwolf de-extinction project and discuss a few of the points you made in your video. Since your original video is already 30 minutes long, I'm just going to respond to parts where I can add some clarification or want to respond to specific claims. Otherwise, this is going to get really long. But Hank, if you'd like to have a discussion at some point, I am happy to do that.
There's a biotechnology company called Colossal that is attempting to de-extinct various animals, and they have just claimed that they have de-extincted their first animal, not just their first animal, the first animal to ever be de-extincted. And that claim does not, in my opinion, hold up to scrutiny.
Well, let's talk about what de-extinction really means. The IUCN Species Survival Commission defines de-extinction as, quote, the process of creating an organism that resembles an extinct species, end quote. So according to that definition, we do believe it's accurate to call this the world's first de-extinction. But I'll get more into the specific genomic edits we made later.
However, there are a number of truly remarkable things that are part of this announcement that allow me to still be excited about it, despite the fact that I think they're saying some stuff that they shouldn't say.
Thanks. Kind of.
So this video is the good, the bad, and the straight up wrong of this announcement. And the realization that we are all going to come to in the end here is that what was done is in some ways more remarkable, but also almost certainly more scary than de-extinction. Because if you could say that a species was created here, it is a species that has never existed before.
I actually agree with that at some level, but then we have to explain how we define a species, and biologists tend to disagree about that a lot. For fun, here's what our co-founder, George Church, who is a pioneer in the field of synthetic biology, has to say about species. It's a quote from his social media post. Here we go. Species-defining differences, governmental and scientific, include a mixture of physical and physiological measures, breeding, food, ecosystem preferences, and DNA. There is no magic number of changes in any of these categories. A single genetic change can cause speciation, while millions of DNA differences between individuals in a population generally do not affect species-specific phenotypes, much less speciation. Our new healthy direwolves with 20 precise simultaneous edits, yielding key phenotypes distinguishing them from gray wolves, signify milestones that will surely be surpassed soon, given the exponential rate of biotech. But for now, we can pause and enjoy the moment. Can we please?
This is not bringing a species back. This is the wholesale creation of a new species by humans.
Well, sort of. Our direwolves reflect key traits that evolved in direwolves. We didn't just decide to make 20 changes at random. We chose specific genes that resurrect extinct traits. Some scientists have estimated that by 2050, half of all species that are alive today will be extinct.
So 2050 is 25 years away. I don't know that any scientists have made this claim. It would be really weird to me if they had, but I'm gonna Google it. So here it is. Biologists think 50% of species will be facing extinction by the end of the century. Currently, 1 in 10 are facing extinction. So that's not extinct. That's in danger of becoming extinct. And I can believe that. And I could see how that stat could get translated in conversations to half of species alive today will be extinct by 2050. And please do not take this as me saying that this isn't a problem and we don't need to face it. Obviously, we need to face it. It's just a fact that I wanted to check because it seemed off to me, and indeed it is off, but like, whatever.
Good correction. Yes, 50% of species could be in danger of becoming extinct by 2050. That's embarrassing.
Is this the world's first de-extinction? No. I don't see any reason why these animals would not be considered gray wolves. They are genetically modified gray wolves. If you would consider them a separate species, then you would have to consider them a synthetic species, and you would not consider them to be a species or even a relative, really, of direwolves. But whatever.
The discussion about what exactly to call them shows just how messy the world of biology can be. And I don't actually see an end to it. As you say, we are going to be having this same conversation from now and into forever. What exactly makes a species a species? It depends on who you ask, but it also depends on why you're asking. If you're asking about fossils, it's mainly about morphology, as that's the data we have. If it's about ecology, it's more likely to be about whether individuals can interbreed. But sometimes it's about geography, like if we're trying to set up boundaries to delimit protection zones. Like any classification system, species concepts are only as useful as they are when applying them makes sense to the actual question. Actual biology does not care. Just ask our Neanderthal ancestors. So let's ask, what is the purpose here? Why are people upset that we called our direwolves direwolves? If it's because our direwolves are not identical to a particular individual extinct direwolf, then we agree. I repeat, they are not the same as any extinct direwolf, whether from Ohio or Southern California or anywhere else. They're also not the same as direwolves in general. We took gray wolf cells and edited the genomes in these cells to reflect specific, targeted direwolf features. But the purpose of the conversations that we are having now is not to classify fossils or to build a phylogenetic tree. It's to discuss de-extinction. It's feasible. It is no longer just in the realm of words and thoughts. We now have data that we can examine to actually begin to evaluate the potential of these tools for habitat restoration and species preservation. Given this purpose, let's turn to the explicit discussion of how to speak about de-extinction. In 2016, the IUCN Species Survival Commission published a report, Guiding Principles on Creating Proxies of Extinct Species for Conservation Benefit. This report describes a successful de-extinction as something that results in a proxy of the extinct species, a substitute that represents, in some sense, the extinct form. That's a quote. Clearly, we will learn more and more about how, morphologically and even ecologically, our wolves represent the extinct form as they get older. But we see already that they are larger, they express the coat phenotype that we intended them to express. They represent, in some sense, the extinct form. Call them proxy direwolves or de-extinct direwolves or whatever it is that clarifies to you the conversation that we are having. All that to say, we're not going to get everyone on the same page about what species concept we should use, but I'm okay with that, because the actual scientific achievement is way more important than what we call them.
The argument that they're making that this is de-extinction is that we have these Jenga blocks and we're pulling blocks out. And if you can slide another block in there, then the ecosystem won't collapse as long as it fills that same niche, as long as it fits into that Jenga block spot. And it's not just like every block is the same size. There's lots of all different sizes of Jenga blocks that are all moving around and all evolving to exist with each other. This is an okay metaphor, actually. Imagine a Jenga tower that's made out of millions of blocks that are constantly moving and responding to each other. And if you take out a big one, there will not be time for the blocks to react to each other and the ecosystem may collapse. And so you want to slot one in real quick. And in that case, what you could do is that you wouldn't have to grab the existing animal that went extinct. You could create an animal that serves that same niche, that is close enough to that blob that you can plop it in there and then the ecosystem will recover. And that's why they're making the case that these wolves are a de-extinction, because theoretically they might be direwolf shaped enough that they would slot into the direwolf-shaped hole left behind by the actual direwolves that went extinct.
Well said. I don't disagree with any of that.
Now, I wouldn't say that slotting in a different species into a niche is de-extinction. I do understand how it could be a functional good in ecosystem ecology. But it also sounds very hard. And also, all of the other Jenga blocks around it are going to react differently to that block that you just slotted in than they would to the original species. And you will not, in that case, have made extinction a thing of the past. That extinction will still have happened. I think that 50, 100 years from now, there's going to be a lot more habitat available on this earth for wilderness. And I think that these conversations probably will have had value at that point, because there will be ecosystem engineering going on. And part of that is going to be genetic modification and species engineering and synthetic species. And we're having those conversations now because we're going to have to figure it out then, and we're going to be fighting about it the whole time, I promise.
Now, this is an important point, and this is what gets us really excited at Colossal for the future of conservation. If you want to call them proxy direwolves, go for it. But this is a very good explanation of the goal. If 50% of all species could be at risk of extinction in just 25 years, think about how much closer our species Jenga tower is to collapsing. And you're right, trying to find the right brick to place into the tower is a really, really hard problem. But if we want to talk about the risk of trying to do something, we also have to talk about the risk of doing nothing. We see de-extinction technology as a radical new form of conservation, and that's what we're going to try to continue to push forward.
Now, you can make the case that it's important to do this with wolves because wolves are important to ecosystems, and there are other wolves that are weirdly not mentioned in this video.
Look, it's a complicated subject, so we decided to make a separate video about the red wolf component. It's also available on our YouTube channel.
Colossal has also cloned red wolf coyote hybrids with the intent of having a species to fill that niche in America, in the United States, in places where there were once red wolves and there no longer are. We've done stuff like that. Like we've done it with Przewalski's horse, where we, had a Przewalski's horse basically have the embryo of a Przewalski's horse implanted into a domestic horse. And now we have more Przewalski's horses in the world, and that's good because that's a natural species of horse that should be in their ecosystem. There's niches for them to exist inside of because they are very recently have left those niches. And predators and wolves are very important to ecosystems, and doing this work with red wolves could potentially have benefit. I just don't know why it's not mentioned in this video. You haven't heard about it. You haven't heard that Colossal cloned red wolves as part of this. I don't know why not.
Great explanation. Thank you for helping get more spotlight on the conservation aspects of this project. We appreciate it.
Now, this is like a legitimately cool, I'm excited about it part of the thing where they found enough direwolf DNA. And it wasn't just them. Like, I think that there are researchers who work with Colossal and are on this research, but then there are people who are just at Colossal or just on this research or whatever. We've had tons of direwolf skulls from the La Brea tar pits, but because it's a tar pit, all the DNA is super degraded. You're not going to get anything off of those. But we have found a couple of specimens of direwolves. One is, I think, 12,000 years ago. One's like almost 80,000 years old. And we've gotten, I think from the older one, we actually got more DNA. That's a long time ago to get usable DNA, to get not just all of the direwolf genome, but like multiple copies of it so that you can fill in a lot of the gaps. You're not going to get one solid unbroken genome, but you could get multiples so that you could do a bunch of computer analysis and have basically a full direwolf genome. And that's amazing. That's really cool.
Thank you. It is really cool.
So this is a very interesting moment in the video to me. This woman has said, we're going to map that to its closest living relative. And then the next line is, so Colossal are using the gray wolf. And that indicates to me, you would listen to that and think that the gray wolf is the closest living relative of the direwolf. It would seem, looking especially just at the skeletons, that direwolves and gray wolves are closely related to each other. But from our current understanding, a paper published in 2021 that looked at the DNA of direwolves, that isn't just like a little bit wrong, it's like wildly wrong. The paper is called Direwolves Were the Last of an Ancient New World Canid Lineage. There are many authors on this paper, including some people who work at Colossal.
Yes, I was a co-author on that paper, and this is where I need to do a little bit of explaining, because this announcement, admittedly, did not go exactly as planned. Now, you made a correction in your second video about this and noted that the 2021 paper actually did say that jackals and gray wolves are equally distantly related to direwolves, but I still have an update here. Over the last 2 years, my colleagues and I have gone back to 2 of the direwolves from that 2021 paper and generated a ton more ancient DNA data. The results of that work are now available on bioRxiv, titled On the Ancestry and Evolution of the Extinct Direwolf. It's a pretty cool title, yeah. We show in that paper that the lineage that evolved into gray wolves actually bred extensively with the lineage that eventually evolved into direwolves. So we now know that gray wolves are indeed closer genetically to direwolves than jackals are. But you couldn't have known that because the paper wasn't publicly available yet. Unfortunately, the New Yorker broke our embargo and posted this story before we were ready. Ideally, we would have been able to show that paper at the same time that we announced the de-extinction of the direwolf. That was the plan all along, and all of the content explaining the project was prepared with that in mind. So, yes, given the information available to you at the time, your correction statement in your second video would have been right. But now we have more information, and you can read all about it on bioRxiv while the paper is being peer-reviewed. Here's another useful clarifying point. What I have consistently said is that dire wolves are closer to gray wolves than to jackals. This is true based on our paper, but if you dig into the meat of the paper, you will also see that when we focus on the places in the genome where dire wolves are genetically unique among canids, red wolves and gray wolves both share a similar number of genetic differences to dire wolves. So the choice was really among these two. When we selected the gray wolf as the surrogate, we considered lots of things. We've talked about genetic and morphological similarities, but we also considered accessibility and what scientific information we could leverage. Things like comparative genomic data, husbandry and veterinary protocols, behavioral and health data, even plans for rewilding. Gray wolves were the clear choice as a surrogate species because this existing research infrastructure helps enable keener insight into scientific outcomes and better animal welfare outcomes.
But the people at Colossal do have a great direwolf DNA sequence, and so maybe they've done science, and I would love to see them release the science where they talk about how they have proved that there was this old lineage, but then it interbred, which specifically the 2021 paper said this. There was no gene flow between dire wolves and gray wolves, but they are arguing with that, but they are not releasing the data that has led them to argue against that. And I think, understandably skeptical of it because it's a better story if the gray wolf is the nearest relative of the dire wolf.
Agreed, yes. Sorry. That information is now available and has been submitted for peer review.
We've developed a technology where you can take a simple blood draw, isolate these specific cells in the blood, and then clone from it.
So this is the first of two big pieces of science news, and that is that they were able to find specific cells in blood that they can use to create a cell line. So the way that cells work is that you can take them out of a body and grow them in a petri dish for a little while, but then they die. But there are specific cells in the body, stem cells, cancer cells, certain kinds of cells that you can actually create a cell line out of that's immortal, that will last a really long time. So usually in order to find those cells, you'd have to do a pretty invasive tissue sample. But in this case, they figured out how to do it with blood, which is awesome. I don't know if this is their advance, but that's great. This is cool. For sure.
It is cool. And yes, the technology was developed in one of our labs and has major implications for conservation. It's a future we're excited about.
We're changing the genome of this living animal partially into the genome of the extinct animal for those genes that matter, for the traits and characteristics that we want to see.
What he's saying here is what traits and characteristics do we want to see in the animal? We're going to pick genes that affect those. And this is another cool part of what Colossal is doing, which is not just taking a genome and being like, okay, we have to get this whole genome into this other animal, but saying, okay, what things actually code for traits, grabbing those and putting them in the wolves. And that's difficult work to do and requires a lot of knowledge that is relatively new. Even in humans, this would be hard to do. And we have a lot more information about human genomes than we do about wolf genomes.
Agreed. And this is a great place to highlight one of the reasons that dire wolves were an ideal choice for the first de-extinct species. Because gray wolves are the surrogate genome for dire wolves, we can leverage decades of scientific research and knowledge about how to do this with animal welfare clearly at the forefront. For example, we learned from our two ancient direwolf genomes that these two direwolves had genetic variants in 3 key pigmentation genes that were predicted to confer lighter coats. But when we explored the potential impact of these specific edits on a gray wolf genetic background, we learned that variants in these 3 genes in gray wolves, well, in dogs, but dogs are domesticated gray wolves, have been associated with albinism and hearing loss. That's not acceptable, and we know that there are pathways that make wolves white in a safe way, so we went with those edits rather than with the edits that evolved in direwolves.
If we want to know which parts of the genome we want to edit to make a gray wolf more like a direwolf.
She said it here, make a gray wolf look more like a direwolf. That's what they're actually doing, so good on her.
If you look back through all of the information we've shared about the mammoth, the dodo, and the thylacine, this is always how we talk about de-extinction. We aren't trying to make something that's genetically identical to one animal of the past. Not only is that impossible, given the technology available today, but it comes with a host of other problems, not the least of which would be a lack of genetic diversity. By identifying which genes control for which traits and editing specifically those genes and traits into an extinct animal's closest living relative, we can lean on the genetic diversity in those living animals to eventually bring back healthy, genetically diverse populations.
So they're not trying to de-extinct anybody. They're trying to create this blob that fits into the right Jenga spot. And so they want to find the genes that help the blob be the right shape to fit in.
Cool, but that actually is the definition of de-extinction that the IUCN SSN came up with in 2016. I'm just saying.
That allowed us to know exactly where the gray wolf differed from the dire wolf. Each time you edit a gene in a cell, you put a lot of stress on that cell because you have to get your gene editing tools in these cells and then these changes are made. So what we do instead is we try to make dozens or hundreds of changes at once. It's called multiplex gene editing.
This is another actually cool thing. So we've got multiplex CRISPR going on here, multiplex gene editing, many sites at the same time. So CRISPR comes in and it like grabs a gene and it swaps it out for something else, or just a segment of code. It doesn't have to be a whole gene, and it swaps it out for something else. And you don't want to do that over and over and over again if you want to make a bunch of changes. And in some cases, you do want to make a bunch of changes because oftentimes a disease is not caused by one single gene. It's caused by several genes interacting in a bad way. And you can swap that one gene and maybe that'll be good. And like that will cure people of certain diseases. Some diseases are like single nucleotide problems. You just need to swip one thing and you're good. You just swip a snip and that you're good. But if you want to do a bunch, say if you want to create an animal that's quite different or genetically modify a crop so that it has a bunch of advantageous traits, there's ways to do that now, but this would be faster, to be able to modify like 20 different sites in the same moment. Now, you're also going to introduce more chances for problems in that situation. But ultimately, I think it's like a good direction to go in. It is worrying from like the designer babies perspective, like if we can make a bunch of changes to, and I don't think there's a huge taboo and lots of legal reasons why we can't do this, but like it's getting so easy to do technologically that I do worry that someone, just like that guy in China went rogue and did a little bit of gene editing on babies. It makes me think that like the next time that happens will be more significant and more worrying and be pretty escalatory. It's one thing to have a baby get born who has a lower chance of getting HIV, which is what those edits were about. It's another to have a baby be born who's going to be, never lose their hair, is going to be 6'7", is going to be extra strong, extra smart, all this stuff. That will actually create, I think, probably a lot of discourse that will drive us in an uncertain direction.
Great explanation, and for the record, we at Colossal have absolutely no intention of using this technology on humans. We are focused on the extinction crisis.
This isn't discussed in this video, but one thing that I do want to talk about is that so there were some genes that were that gene in direwolves. From what I understand, they are actually the genes that were in direwolves that were swapped out with the gray wolf gene. But then there were also some genes that they wanted to switch out, but they decided not to because they knew that those genes could be associated with other diseases like blindness or loss of hearing or something. And so they didn't want to mess with those genes. So instead, they made those changes by adding in those traits elsewhere or with other genes that they knew they weren't going to be associated with problems. And I think that's like a responsible, ethical way to handle that.
Thank you. Healthy pups was our first order goal when we produced our functionally de-extinct proxy direwolves.
Are pursuing on the science side our own exogenous development team so that one day we won't have to use surrogates.
That's wild. That would be the biggest advance that they're trying to work on, is to be able to have a baby mammal be born without a surrogate. So not, especially this is a placental mammal. Like you could kind of see this with marsupials, but with a placental mammal, how do you have a baby be born without a mother? I guess someday we'll get there, but that's wild.
Yup, wild. And we're closer than you might think.
And so to be on sort of the ground floor of creating a tool that will be the solution for our biodiversity crisis.
I'm going to complain about using the phrase "the solution to our biodiversity crisis" because, again, the problem is not that we can't de-extinct animals. The problem is that we continue to encroach on habitats of animals, and also that the climate is changing. There's going to be many solutions to this problem, and I applaud people for exploring various solutions.
Another very important correction, and one that I fully agree with, and so does Colossal as an organization. We do not see de-extinction as a replacement for conservation. We see it as a tool in the conservation toolkit. We do a lot of work with people developing and deploying parts of traditional conservation toolkit, and we make a ton of the technology we develop available to conservation organizations around the world. But you're right, and this is important. De-extinction is not the solution to the biodiversity crisis, but we are confident that the de-extinction toolkit can help. A lot.
There's nothing here. It's hard to celebrate science when you're constrained by the truth in ways that these people aren't. Obviously, everyone in this video was told that they have to say that direwolves are back. And of course, I feel like a stick in the mud. I feel that part of my job is popularizing science, but a bigger part of my job is saying true things. And so I can't sit here and tell you that direwolves have been de-extincted, when in reality there are a few gray wolves that have been genetically modified to more closely resemble direwolves.
Hank, you are being a bit of a stick in the mud. Just kidding. But I don't disagree with your point. This is something I said in response to the news breaking about this project. If you want to call these gray wolves with 20 genetic edits reflecting direwolf traits, you can totally do that. You can call them proxy direwolves or colossal direwolves. No issue here. And not to oversimplify the topic, but if you ask somebody what Jurassic Park is about, they usually say dinosaurs. They don't say frogs that have been genetically modified to resemble dinosaurs. We aren't making clones of extinct animals. We're resurrecting extinct traits. And from what we know of direwolves now, these actually do resemble direwolves.
What I know is that organisms are extraordinarily complicated. And if you change 20 genes, in the course of actually evolving those 20 changes, a bunch of other stuff's going to happen that are going to look like they don't matter, but probably do matter. You know, if you get bigger, you have to have more systems for controlling cancer because you have more cells. So these genetically modified wolves might be much more prone to getting cancer because they gave them the get big gene, but they didn't do all the little subtle tweaks to the rest of the genome that would allow for that genome to happen while keeping the natural lifespan the same length or even longer, as tends to happen with larger organisms. That's not like a thing that's definitely going to happen, just to be clear. But it's an example of like the reality of the complexity of organisms.
This is actually a really important point and something I'd like to expand on. It's also another reason that direwolves are such an ideal first de-extinction. I've already mentioned that we drew from our deep knowledge of gray wolves to decide which edits to make, specifically not to make some direwolf edits that were associated with a potentially bad health outcome. Again, healthy pups. That was our first order goal. And now that we have living animals and are moving into the next stage of de-extinction research, our knowledge of gray wolves again comes to bear. What are the long-term effects of the edits on the animals? Are there unexpected effects on gene regulation, on lifespan, on behavior? How will the animals interact with their habitat and their ecosystem? And again, because we know so much about gray wolves, and certainly more than we know about Nicobar pigeons, for example, we have the comparative data that we need to ask these questions in a rigorous way. If gene editing is to become a tool that's broadly used for conservation, and I certainly hope that it will, we need to generate real data on exactly these things. And we need these data before we can safely rewild anything.
There's a few things that are like really exciting, like applying knowledge in new ways with a large placental mammal, lots of edits leading to viable offspring, a real differently shaped organism in a way that I don't think that you would make the case that this is a new species, but if you did, it's not going to be a direwolf, but it would be a synthetic species. I think contemplating the idea of a synthetic species when you can do multiplex gene editing, we kind of have to do that now, I guess. Like, if you can do multiplex gene editing, we have to wrestle with the reality that we can now probably create synthetic species. Synthetic species are on the table now. And it's not like they were taking gray wolf genes and putting them in gray wolves. Like, these are other genes from other species that they're putting in gray wolves. That's wild. Like, it's amazing. But I think that talking about creating a synthetic species would be way like less exciting for a lot of people. Not just because it's really cool to make a direwolf, but because it's kind of scary to make a synthetic species. Like, it's totally seems probably fine to a lot of folks who are, you know, not thinking about biology and ecology all day long. It probably seems pretty cool to like bring back a species that used to exist, where it would probably feel to a lot of those people a lot less cool to talk about creating a species that has never existed, which is closer to what Colossal just did.
Again, you're not wrong here, but I want to note again that we didn't just make a bunch of changes for the sake of making changes. We targeted 20 precise changes to reflect key traits that went extinct with the direwolf. There are a ton of potential use cases in conservation that we're interested in pursuing. For example, in Australia, there is an introduced cane toad that secretes a toxin that's deadly to just about every endemic predator. Interestingly, predators in South America, where the cane toad evolved, have some immunity because those predators had millions of years to evolve ways to deal with the toxin. By tweaking just one gene, one base even, in the critically endangered northern quoll to mimic the version of the gene that evolved in South America, we've shown that we can actually make that population 3,000 times more resistant to cane toad toxin. Think about that. One edited nucleotide base in a 3 billion base pair genome, and we have complete resistance and a species that has a chance of surviving. But, as you've said, we're being extremely careful about how to apply these tools. These technologies are super exciting and, when integrated with established conservation strategies, give us an additional tool to fight back against biodiversity loss. Anyway, big fan of the channel, Hank. Thanks for covering our project, and if you'd like to discuss any of these points further, I would be more than happy to do that. As you pointed out in your video, these kinds of conversations are really important because these technologies are going to change the world. We believe applying genomic technologies to prevent biodiversity loss is an important application. And for all that we've discussed here, there are a huge number of projects we're working on with conservation organizations that haven't gotten nearly as much attention as this one. And hey, just to shout to the choir, we at Colossal do not see these tools as a replacement for what we're doing now, but as a hopeful yes and addition to our conservation toolkit. Habitats around the world are changing faster than species can evolve. While we continue to invest in protecting habitats and safeguarding biodiversity for the future, we also need to be developing and eventually deploying tools that can help these species keep up. Stay tuned. Much more to come.